Husband left his pregnant wife crying at the hospital, but her lawyer's call made him lose everything. The fluorescent lights of Manhattan General Hospital buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the sterile walls of labor and delivery ward. Grace Walters gripped the metal bed rails until her knuckles turned white, her breathing shallow and ragged as another contraction ripped through her body. "Mrs. Walters, you're doing great," Nurse Patricia Martinez said softly, adjusting the monitors that beeped steadily beside the bed. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. Just breathe through it." Grace's eyes darted toward the empty chair beside her bed, the chair where Christopher should have been sitting, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Instead, she faced the most terrifying moment of her life completely alone. "Where is he?" she whispered, more to herself than to the nurse. Her phone lay silent on the bedside table, the screen dark despite the 17 missed calls she'd made in the past 4 hours. 23 miles away, in the warm amber glow of Le Bernardin, Christopher Walters raised his wine glass toward Lana Brooks, his wedding ring conspicuously absent from his finger. The woman across from him was everything Grace wasn't: young, carefree, unburdened by the responsibilities that had weighed down his marriage. "To new beginnings," Christopher said, his voice smooth with wine and anticipation. Lana's laugh tinkled like wind chimes as she clinked her glass against his. "I can't believe you're finally going through with it. Leaving her, I mean." Christopher's phone vibrated on the table. Grace's name flashed across the screen for the 18th time. Without hesitation, he declined the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. "She's stronger than she looks," he said, cutting into his perfectly prepared salmon. "Grace has always been the independent type. She'll figure it out. But what about the baby?" Christopher's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, perhaps, or a whisper of conscience. Then it was gone, replaced by the same callous indifference that had been growing in him for months. "The baby will be fine. Kids are resilient." He took another sip of wine. "Besides, I never wanted to be tied down like this. Grace knew that when we got married." Back at the hospital, Grace's contractions were getting stronger, closer together. Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending physician, entered the room with quiet confidence, her scrub still pristine despite being 12 hours into her shift. "Mrs. Walters, we're getting close now. I need you to focus on your breathing. Where's your husband?" The question hit Grace like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with physical pain. He said he'd be here. He promised." Dr. Kim exchanged a knowing glance with Nurse Martinez. They'd seen this before. Women abandoned at their most vulnerable moment, left to face the miracle and terror of childbirth alone. "Sweetie," Nurse Martinez said gently, placing a warm hand on Grace's shoulder. "Some people show you who they really are when it matters most. You're going to be an amazing mother with or without him." As if summoned by her words, Grace's phone finally buzzed. She grabbed it desperately, hoping to see Christopher's voice calling to explain, to apologize, to tell her he was on his way. Instead, she found a text message. "Having second thoughts about everything. Need time to think. You're strong. You'll handle this. See." The phone slipped from Grace's trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, final and absolute. "Mrs. Walters?" Dr. Kim's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I need you to push now. Your baby is ready to meet you." Grace looked up at the ceiling, at the harsh fluorescent lights that had witnessed her husband's betrayal. Something inside her shifted. Not just the baby preparing to enter the world, but something deeper, more fundamental. The woman who had spent 3 years making excuses for Christopher's late nights, his growing distance, his obvious lies, was dying in this hospital bed. In her place, someone new was being born. "I'm ready," Grace said, her voice steady for the first time in hours. She wasn't just talking about the birth. Outside, November snow began to fall across Manhattan, coating the city in a pristine white blanket. In a restaurant across town, Christopher Walters ordered dessert, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. In the delivery room, Grace Walters prepared to bring new life into the world, and to discover just how strong she really was when everything she had believed in crumbled around her. The monitors beeped faster now, matching the rhythm of her heart as she faced the future alone, but no longer afraid. At 3:47 a.m., Lily Grace Walters entered the world with a piercing cry that echoed through the delivery room like a battle cry. The baby's tiny fists punched at the air, as if she too was fighting against the circumstances of her arrival. Dr. Kim placed the newborn on Grace's chest, and for the first time in hours, silence fell over the room. Grace looked down at her daughter's perfect face, Christopher's dark hair but her own determined chin, and felt something shift inside her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "She's beautiful," Nurse Martinez whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. Even after 20 years of deliveries, moments like these still moved her. Grace traced her finger along Lily's tiny cheek, marveling at how something so small could feel so powerful. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered. "It's just you and me now." The words carried more weight than anyone in the room could understand. They weren't just about this moment. They were a promise, a declaration, a new beginning. 3 floors below, in the hospital parking garage, Grace's best friend, Meredith Hayes, was arguing with the night security guard about visiting hours. At 32, Meredith had the persistence of a prosecutor and the loyalty of a sister. When Grace's frantic call had reached her at midnight, she'd driven through the snowstorm without hesitation. "I don't care what time it is," Meredith said firmly, her designer coat dusted with snow. "My best friend just gave birth alone because her husband is—" She stopped herself, remembering that hospital walls had ears. The security guard, a kind man named Frank who'd worked nights for 15 years, had seen enough drama to recognize genuine emergency from mere convenience. "Room 418, he said quietly. "Elevators to your right." When Meredith burst through the door of Grace's room 20 minutes later, she found her friend sitting up in bed, holding Lily with an expression of serene determination that was somehow more unsettling than tears would have been. "Where the hell is Christopher?" Meredith demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Grace looked up, and Meredith was struck by how different her friend looked. Not just tired from labor but transformed, as if the woman who had called her 12 hours ago in panic no longer existed. "He sent a text," Grace said calmly, nodding toward her phone on the bedside table. "He needs time to think." Meredith snatched up the phone and read the message, her face darkening with each word. "I'm going to kill him, slowly, with a rusty spoon." "No, you're not." Grace's voice was steady, almost eerily so, "because he just did me the biggest favor of my life." "Grace, honey, I know you're in shock, but I'm not in shock." Grace shifted Lily to her other arm, the movement natural and protective. "I'm awake. For the first time in 3 years, I'm completely awake." The morning light was beginning to filter through the hospital windows, painting everything in soft gold. Grace had been staring at that light for hours, thinking about the conversation she'd overheard 6 months ago, Christopher on the phone in his study, whispering to someone about how trapped he felt, how different things would be if he were free. She'd pretended not to hear, the way she'd pretended not to notice the late-night texts, the mysterious business trips, the way he'd stopped looking at her when she spoke. She'd told herself it was stress from the pregnancy, from the business, from anything except what it actually was. "Mir," Grace said quietly, "I need you to call Howard Bennett for me." Meredith frowned. Howard was Grace's family lawyer, the man who'd helped her father set up the construction company that Grace had inherited at 25. "Grace, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months." Grace looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against her chest. "Do you remember when Christopher and I got married? The prenup discussions? You refused to sign one. You said marriage was about trust." Grace's smile was small but sharp, and he was so eager to prove his love that he insisted all the business assets stay in my name. "For tax purposes," he said. "Protection from liability." The realization dawned on Meredith's face slowly. "Grace, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that the man who left me crying in a hospital bed while he wined and dined his girlfriend doesn't own anything. Not the house, not the cars, not the business accounts." Grace's voice remained steady, but steel had crept into her tone. "Everything is mine. Legally, financially, completely mine." Meredith sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. "Jesus, Grace, he doesn't know, does he? He has no idea. He's always been too proud to pay attention to paperwork details. Called it boring business stuff and left it all to me." Grace shifted again, and Lily made a small, contented sound. "Call Howard. Tell him I need to see him today." "Today? Grace, you just gave birth. You need to rest. I need to protect my daughter." The words came out with quiet force. "I need to make sure that when Christopher Walters decides to come crawling back, and he will, I'm ready for him." Across town, Christopher was waking up in Lana's apartment, his head pounding from too much wine and too little sleep. The morning light streaming through her blinds felt harsh, unforgiving. His phone showed 43 missed calls from various numbers he didn't recognize, and one text from Meredith that made his blood run cold. "Congratulations. You have a daughter, and you're about to have much bigger problems than you know." Christopher sat up, suddenly wide awake. Through the thin walls of Lana's studio apartment, he could hear her neighbor's baby crying, and for the first time since leaving the restaurant last night, the weight of what he'd done began to settle on his shoulders. But it was too late for regret. In a hospital room across the city, Grace Walters was already moving forward, one carefully calculated step at a time. As Lily slept peacefully in her mother's arms, Grace made a silent promise. Her daughter would never wonder if she was worth fighting for, and Christopher would learn that abandoning a woman at her most vulnerable moment was the costliest mistake of his life. The game had changed. Christopher just didn't know it yet. Howard Bennett arrived at Manhattan General at precisely 9:30 a.m., carrying his weathered leather briefcase and the same quiet authority that had made him one of New York's most respected family attorneys for 30 years. At 55, Howard had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But Grace's father had once told her that Howard Bennett in a courtroom was like watching a master chess player, always thinking 5 moves ahead. "Grace," Howard said softly as he entered her hospital room, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd known her since she was 7 years old. "I came as soon as Meredith called." Grace was sitting up in bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd given birth 12 hours earlier. Lily slept peacefully in the hospital bassinet beside her, tiny fingers curled into perfect fists. Meredith sat in the corner chair, laptop open, already taking notes. "Howard, thank you for coming." Grace's voice was steady, businesslike. "I need your help with something that can't wait." Howard set his briefcase down and pulled out a yellow legal pad, his movements deliberate and careful. "Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Grace laid out the situation with clinical precision. Christopher's abandonment, the text message, the years of growing distance and suspicious behavior. Howard listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "And the asset situation?" Howard asked when Grace finished. "Everything is in my name. The house on Riverside Drive, both cars, all business accounts, the construction company stocks and bonds." Grace paused, shifting slightly as Lily stirred. "Christopher wanted it that way when we married. Said it would protect us from business liabilities." Howard's pen stopped moving. In his 3 decades of practice, he'd seen many cases of financial infidelity, but rarely had he encountered someone who'd been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by their own greed and carelessness. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Howard leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. "What do you want to accomplish here? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back." Grace looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at Howard. "I want to protect Lily. I want to make sure Christopher can never abandon her the way he abandoned me. And I want him to understand that actions have consequences. Revenge? Justice." Grace's voice didn't waver. "He made a choice last night. Now I'm making mine." Howard nodded slowly, then began writing on his legal pad. "Here's what we can do immediately. First, I'll file paperwork to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards. Given that the accounts are in your name, this is well within your rights. Second, I'll draft separation papers that establish temporary custody and support arrangements." "How long will this take?" "The account freezes can happen today. I have contacts at the banks." Howard glanced at his watch. "The separation paperwork will take until tomorrow morning." Meredith looked up from her laptop. "What about the business? Walters Construction has 3 active projects." Grace nodded. "I've been thinking about that. All the contracts are with me as primary owner. Christopher is listed as general manager, but he has no legal ownership stake." She paused, her business mind clicking into gear despite her exhaustion. "I can run the company without him. I have been running it, really. He just showed up for client meetings and took credit." Howard made more notes. "Grace, I have to warn you, Christopher will likely try to challenge this. He'll claim common law ownership, emotional distress, anything his lawyer can think of. Let him try." Grace's voice carried a steel that Howard had never heard before. "I have 3 years of documented business records, tax returns, and bank statements showing that I've been the primary decision-maker and income earner. Plus, he just abandoned his pregnant wife and newborn daughter. No judge in New York is going to be sympathetic to that." At that moment, Grace's phone buzzed. Christopher's name appeared on the screen. The 3 adults in the room stared at it as if it were a live grenade. "Answer it," Howard said quietly. But don't say anything about what we've discussed. Act normal. Grace hesitated, then accepted the call. Hello, Christopher. Grace, Jesus, I'm sorry about last night. Christopher's voice sounded rough, hungover. I got your friend's message about the baby. Is everything okay? Are you okay? The casual tone, the complete absence of urgency or real concern, made Meredith's hands clench into fists. Howard watched Grace's face, noting how her expression remained perfectly calm. The baby is fine. Her name is Lily. Grace's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. She was born at 3:47 this morning. That's great. Look, I know I messed up last night. I was confused, overwhelmed. You know how I get when things feel out of control. Grace closed her eyes briefly. How many times had she made excuses for him using those exact words? Where are you, Christopher? I stayed at a friend's place. To clear my head. But I'm coming to the hospital now. We need to talk. No. The word came out sharp and final. You're not coming here. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, what do you mean I'm not coming? Grace, that's my daughter too. Is she? Because last night you made it very clear that you wanted nothing to do with this family. I never said that. I said I needed time to think. Grace looked at Howard, who nodded encouragingly. Christopher, I think we both need some space right now. I'm going home tomorrow with Lily. We can discuss everything once I've had time to recover. Grace, come on. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. I made a mistake, okay? People make mistakes. Yes, Grace said quietly. They do. Goodbye, Christopher. She hung up before he could respond. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of the monitors and Lily's gentle breathing. How did that feel? Howard asked. Grace considered the question. Like I just started speaking a language I'd forgotten I knew. Howard smiled. The first genuine smile he'd allowed himself since arriving. Good. Because we're going to need that strength for what comes next. What happens now? Now I make some phone calls, and by tonight Christopher Walters is going to discover that leaving you was the most expensive decision of his life. Howard closed his legal pad and stood. But Grace, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll rest today. Tomorrow is going to be very interesting and you'll need your strength. As Howard left the room, Grace settled back against her pillows, watching Lily sleep. Outside, the November snow had stopped falling and weak sunlight filtered through the windows. For the first time in months, Grace felt like she could breathe. Christopher had underestimated her, just as he'd underestimated the consequences of his choices. But Grace had learned something in the past 12 hours that would serve her well in the days to come. She was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The war was about to begin, and Grace intended to win. Christopher Walters stood in the marble lobby of Chase Manhattan Bank at 11:30 a.m., his face flushed with embarrassment and growing panic. The ATM had rejected his card 3 times, and now the branch manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Sullivan, was explaining something that seemed impossible. I'm sorry, Mr. Walters, but according to our records, you are not an authorized user on any of these accounts, she said, her voice professional but firm. The primary account holder has requested that all access be suspended pending legal proceedings. That's ridiculous, Christopher snapped, his voice echoing in the quiet bank. Several customers turned to stare. These are my accounts. My business accounts. I've been banking here for 5 years. Mrs. Sullivan consulted her computer screen again. Sir, I show that all accounts under the business name Walters Construction are registered to Grace Elizabeth Walters as sole proprietor. Your name appears only as an authorized user, which privileges have been revoked as of 9:15 this morning. The words hit Christopher like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the marble counter, trying to process what he was hearing. There has to be some mistake. I need to speak to someone else, someone who knows what they're talking about. I am the branch manager, Mr. Walters. This is my area of expertise. Mrs. Sullivan's patience was wearing thin. If you'd like to dispute this action, you'll need to contact your attorney. Christopher's phone buzzed in his pocket. Lana's name appeared on the screen, but he ignored it. She'd been calling all morning, asking about breakfast plans and shopping trips that he could no longer afford. The irony wasn't lost on him. Last night's expensive dinner had been charged to a credit card that was probably frozen too. What about my personal checking account? He asked desperately. Mrs. Sullivan typed something else, her expression growing more sympathetic despite her professional demeanor. Mr. Walters, that account shows a balance of $347. It hasn't had significant activity in 18 months. Christopher's knees nearly buckled. He'd transferred everything to the business accounts for tax purposes, another decision Grace had advised him to make years ago. At the time, it had seemed smart, efficient. Now it felt like a trap he'd walked into blindfolded. "I need to call my wife," he muttered, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "Mr. Walters," Mrs. Sullivan said quietly, lowering her voice so other customers couldn't hear. "You might want to consider that your wife just gave birth. Perhaps it would be wise to speak with a lawyer first." The suggestion hit him like a slap. Even a bank manager could see how badly he'd miscalculated. Christopher stumbled out of the bank into the cold November air, his breath forming desperate clouds as he tried to make sense of his situation. His phone rang. This time it wasn't Lana. It was his mother. "Christopher, dear, I just heard about the baby." Dorothy Walters' voice was bright with excitement. "When can your father and I come meet our granddaughter?" Christopher closed his eyes, leaning against the cold brick wall of the bank. "Mom, it's complicated." "What do you mean complicated? Is the baby healthy? Is Grace okay?" How could he explain that he'd abandoned his wife during labor, that he'd spent the night with another woman while Grace gave birth alone, that he was currently standing outside a bank, financially ruined by his own stupidity? "Everything's fine, Mom. I need to handle some things first." Christopher Robert Walters. His mother's voice took on the stern tone he remembered from childhood. "What have you done?" Before he could answer, another call came through. Howard Bennett's number appeared on his screen, and Christopher's blood ran cold. Grace's family lawyer only called when there was serious trouble. "Mom, I have to go. I'll call you later." "Christopher, don't you dare hang up on—" He switched calls, his heart pounding. "Howard." "Christopher." Howard's voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its neutrality. "I'm calling to inform you that separation papers have been filed this morning. You'll be served within the next few hours." "Howard, come on. This is ridiculous. Grace is emotional. She just gave birth. She's not thinking clearly. On the contrary, she's thinking more clearly than I've ever seen her." Howard's tone didn't change. "Christopher, I'm going to give you some free advice. As someone who's known your family for a long time, get yourself a lawyer, a good one, and do it today." "This is insane. I made one mistake. One night of poor judgment. I was overwhelmed, scared about becoming a father. People make mistakes, Howard." "Yes, they do. And then they face the consequences." Howard paused. "Christopher, Grace is not the same woman you left crying in that hospital bed. She's done being understanding. She's done making excuses for you. And frankly, after what you put her through, I don't blame her." The line went dead. Christopher stared at his phone, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. No money, no credit cards, no access to his business, and now legal papers that would make everything official. His phone buzzed with a text from Lana. "Babe, are we still on for shopping? I saw this amazing dress at Bergdorf's." Christopher nearly laughed at the absurdity. 24 hours ago, he'd felt so clever, so free, so certain that he was escaping a life that had become too small for him. He'd told Lana he was ready to start fresh, to build something new and exciting. Now he couldn't even afford coffee. Another text appeared, this one from an unknown number. "Mr. Walters, this is Jeremy Nash from Nash & Associates Legal Services. You are hereby notified that you will be served with legal documents today between 2 to 6 p.m. Please ensure you are available to receive them." Christopher sank onto a nearby bench. His expensive suit wrinkled and his confidence shattered. Across the street he could see couples walking together, families with children, people living normal lives that suddenly seemed impossibly precious. He pulled up Grace's number and stared at it for a long moment. What could he possibly say? How could he explain that he'd thrown away everything good in his life for what? A few hours of feeling young and reckless? The thrill of being wanted by someone who didn't know his flaws? Instead, he called the only person he could think of who might help him navigate this disaster. "David, it's Christopher. I need a lawyer, a really good lawyer, and I need him today." As he waited for his attorney friend to call him back, Christopher Walters sat alone on a cold bench in Manhattan, watching his old life crumble around him like autumn leaves. Grace had been right about one thing. People did make mistakes. He was just beginning to understand how much his was going to cost him. Grace stood in the doorway of the nursery she'd spent months preparing, holding Lily close to her chest. The afternoon light filtered through the cream-colored curtains, illuminating the hand-painted murals of woodland creatures that Christopher had promised to help her finish. She'd completed them alone during her 8th month of pregnancy, working late into the evenings while he attended client meetings that she now understood were dates with Lana. "Welcome home, baby girl," Grace whispered, kissing the top of Lily's downy head. The house felt different now, not empty but liberated, like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. Meredith emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the determined expression of someone who'd been making lists. "Okay, I've stocked the fridge, started a load of baby clothes, and called your mom. She's driving down from Albany tomorrow to help." "You don't have to take care of me, Mir." "Yes, I do. That's what friends are for." Meredith settled into the rocking chair beside the window. "Besides, someone needs to be here when Christopher inevitably shows up with his tail between his legs." As if summoned by her words, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed through the quiet house. Grace moved to the window and saw Christopher's BMW, her BMW technically, parked crookedly in front of the garage. He sat behind the wheel for several minutes, clearly gathering courage for a conversation he should have had 24 hours earlier. "He's here," Grace said simply. "Want me to get rid of him?" Grace considered the offer, then shook her head. "No, I think it's time Christopher and I had an honest conversation." The doorbell rang, followed by tentative knocking. Grace took her time walking to the front door, Lily still secure in her arms. Through the frosted glass she could see Christopher's silhouette, shifting nervously from foot to foot. When she opened the door, Grace was struck by how different he looked. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd finally realized the magnitude of his mistakes. "Grace." His voice was small, uncertain. "Can we talk?" "I suppose we should." Grace stepped aside to let him in, noting how he avoided looking directly at Lily. "Living room." Christopher followed her into the space they'd once shared as a couple, his eyes taking in details as if seeing them for the first time. The family photos still lined the mantelpiece, but they felt like artifacts from someone else's life now. "She's beautiful," Christopher said finally, gesturing toward Lily. "Her name is Lily. Lily Grace Walters." Grace settled into the armchair that had been her father's, positioning herself like someone prepared for a business negotiation rather than a family reunion. Christopher perched on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly together. "Grace, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry. I was scared, overwhelmed by the idea of being a father. I panicked. You panicked," Grace repeated, her voice neutral. "Is that what you call spending the evening with Lana Brooks while I gave birth to your daughter?" Christopher's face went pale. "How did you—" "I'm not stupid, Christopher. I've known about Lana for months. The late meetings, the mysterious texts, the way you stopped touching me, stopped looking at me." Grace shifted Lily to her other arm, the movement natural and protective. "I just kept telling myself that once the baby came, you'd remember why you married me. Grace, it's not what you think. Lana and I were just—" "You're just what? Friends?" "Because I have friends, Christopher, and I don't disappear with them when my wife is in labor." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of accumulated lies and disappointments. Christopher stared at his hands, searching for words that might repair what he'd broken. "I want to come home," he said finally. "I want us to be a family." Grace studied his face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that he understood the depth of what he'd done. Instead, she saw the same self-centered panic that had driven him to Lana's arms in the first place. "Christopher, do you love her?" The question caught him off guard. "What? Lana, do you love her?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The hesitation told Grace everything she needed to know. "You don't love her," Grace continued, her voice clinically calm. "You love the idea of her. You love feeling young and unencumbered and free from responsibility. But the moment real life intrudes, the moment she expects something from you besides expensive dinners and weekend getaways, you'll abandon her too. That's not true, isn't it? Where is she right now, Christopher? Where's your great love while you're here begging me to take you back?" Christopher's jaw tightened. "This isn't about Lana. This is about us, about our family." "Our family?" Grace's laugh was soft but sharp. "Christopher, you forfeited your place in this family when you chose another woman over your wife and daughter. You can't just decide you want it back because the alternative turned out to be more complicated than you expected." "Grace, please. I made a mistake. One mistake. People can forgive mistakes. Some mistakes, yes. but some mistakes reveal who a person really is. Grace stood, moving to the window where she could see her neighbors' houses, the normal suburban life she'd thought she wanted. Tell me, Christopher, if Lana had enough money to support you, if she could give you the lifestyle you want without any of the responsibility, would you still be here asking for forgiveness? The question hung in the air between them like a trap. Christopher's silence was answer enough. I've filed for separation, Grace said quietly. Howard has already frozen all the accounts and suspended your access to the business assets. You can't do that. I built that business too. No, you didn't. Grace turned back to face him, and Christopher was startled by the steel in her eyes. I built that business. I secured the contracts, managed the finances, handled the logistics. You showed up for photo opportunities and client dinners. You were the face of the company, Christopher, but I was its backbone. Grace, be reasonable. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, start over. I don't want to start over with you. The words came out clear and final. I want to start over without you. Christopher stood abruptly, his desperation finally showing. You're making a huge mistake. You'll never find anyone who loves you the way I do. Grace looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in her arms, tiny face peaceful and trusting. You're right, she said softly. I'll never find anyone who loves me the way you do. Conditionally, selfishly, when it's convenient. She looked back at Christopher. I'm hoping to find someone who loves me better. The words hit Christopher like a physical blow. He stood there for a moment, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water before turning toward the door. This isn't over, Grace. I have rights, parental rights, financial rights. Yes, you do. And I'm sure your lawyer will explain exactly what those rights are worth when you abandoned your family. Grace followed him to the front door. Goodbye, Christopher. As the door closed behind him, Grace heard his car start with a roar of frustration before speeding away. She stood in the quiet foyer for a moment, waiting to feel something. Sadness, regret, loneliness. Instead, she felt only relief. Meredith appeared from the kitchen where she'd been tactfully absent during the confrontation. How do you feel? Grace looked down at Lily, who had slept peacefully through the entire encounter. Like I just took out the trash. Outside, the November afternoon was growing dark, but inside the house, Grace had never felt more at peace. Christopher would fight her, she knew. He would hire lawyers and make threats and try to paint himself as the victim. But Grace had something he didn't. The absolute certainty that she was protecting her daughter from a man who would always choose himself first. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. 2 weeks after his humiliating confrontation with Grace, Christopher sat in the cramped office of David Blackstone, a divorce attorney whose reputation was built more on aggression than ethics. The office smelled of stale coffee and desperation, with towers of case files threatening to topple from every available surface. Let me get this straight, Blackstone said, adjusting his cheap tie and consulting his notes. Your wife owns everything. The house, the business, the cars, the bank accounts, everything. It's not that simple, Christopher insisted, though even to his own ears the protest sounded weak. I worked for that business. I helped build it. But you're not legally listed as an owner. Your name isn't on the deed to the house. You have no joint financial accounts. Blackstone's expression was the kind lawyers wore when they were about to deliver very expensive bad news. Christopher, from a legal standpoint, you're basically a well-paid employee who lived rent-free. Christopher's phone buzzed on the desk between them. Another message from Lana, the fourth one today. She'd been growing increasingly impatient with his financial situation, especially after her credit card had been declined at Saks Fifth Avenue, when she'd tried to charge a $2,000 handbag to what she thought was their joint account. What about parental rights? Christopher asked, ignoring the phone. You have them. Visitation, shared custody, potentially. But Christopher, Blackstone leaned forward. You abandoned your wife while she was in labor. That's not going to play well with any judge, especially if your wife's attorney can prove you were with another woman at the time. The reality hit Christopher like a freight train. So what are you saying? I'm saying that your best bet is to negotiate. Accept whatever settlement Grace is willing to offer, and try to salvage some kind of relationship with your daughter. Blackstone closed the file. Fighting this in court will cost you money you don't have, and will likely result in even less favorable terms. Christopher left the attorney's office feeling more defeated than ever. His phone had died during the meeting, leaving him cut off from the constant stream of increasingly desperate messages from Lana. He walked the 12 blocks back to his temporary housing, a studio apartment in Queens that he could barely afford, because he could no longer justify the cost of taxi rides. Meanwhile, across town, Grace was discovering just how much her life had improved without Christopher's constant presence. She sat in her newly organized home office, reviewing construction contracts while Lily napped peacefully in her bouncer nearby. The business was running more smoothly than it had in months, now that she didn't have to work around Christopher's unpredictable schedule and impulsive decisions that often created problems with clients. Her assistant, Janet Williams, knocked on the doorframe. "Grace, I have the Morrison project update. Also, there's been some interesting feedback from clients." "What kind of feedback?" Janet looked uncomfortable. "Well, several clients have mentioned that they're actually relieved to be working directly with you now. Apparently, Christopher had made some promises about timelines and costs that weren't realistic." Grace wasn't surprised. Christopher had always been more concerned with making the sale than delivering on commitments. "What else?" "The Hendersons called specifically to say they're glad he's no longer involved. Apparently, he made Mrs. Henderson uncomfortable during their last meeting." Grace looked up from her paperwork. "Uncomfortable how?" "I didn't press for details, but reading between the lines, I think he might have been inappropriate. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she felt safer working with you alone." The information settled in Grace's stomach like a stone. How many other warning signs had she missed or chosen to ignore? How many other people had seen Christopher's true nature while she'd been making excuses for him? "Janet, I want you to reach out to all our female clients from the past 2 years. Subtly. Just check in, see how they feel about our service, if they have any concerns they'd like to address. Are you thinking there might be other incidents?" Grace looked down at Lily, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the complicated legacy her father had left behind. "I'm thinking we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." That evening, as Grace was feeding Lily in the quiet of the nursery, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Christopher's mother, Dorothy. "Grace, dear, how are you holding up?" Dorothy's voice was warm but strained. "I'm doing well, Mrs. Walters. Lily is healthy and growing beautifully. I'm so glad to hear that. Grace, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted you to know that Robert and we don't approve of what Christopher has done. Not at all." Grace was touched by the unexpected support. "Thank you. That means a lot. We've tried talking to him, but he seems to think this is all some kind of misunderstanding that will blow over. He's staying with his brother Kevin in Queens, and frankly, Kevin's wife is not happy about it." The information was useful. Grace had wondered where Christopher was living since he'd clearly moved out of whatever arrangement he'd had with Lana. "Mrs. Walters, I want you to know that you and Mr. Walters are welcome to visit Lily anytime. She's your granddaughter, and what happened between Christopher and me doesn't change that." Grace heard Dorothy's sharp intake of breath. "Oh, sweetheart, that's very generous of you. Especially after everything." After they hung up, Grace reflected on the conversation. Christopher's own parents were distancing themselves from his actions. His brother's family was reluctant to support him. Even his business relationships were revealing a pattern of behavior that Grace had been too close to see clearly. Christopher, meanwhile, was sitting in Kevin's living room, watching his 3-year-old nephew play with toy trucks, while his sister-in-law, Monica, made pointed comments about family responsibility and poor life choices. The apartment felt oppressively small, filled with the detritus of a young family's busy life, toys, laundry, the constant noise of domestic chaos. "I don't understand why you can't just apologize and fix this," Monica said, not looking up from the dishes she was aggressively washing. "Grace is a good woman. She didn't deserve what you did to her." "It's complicated, Monica." "No, it's not. You cheated on your pregnant wife and abandoned her in the hospital. It's actually pretty straightforward." Kevin looked up from the laptop where he'd been pretending to work. "Christopher, you need to figure this out. Monica and I can't keep supporting you indefinitely. We have our own family to think about." The message was clear. His welcome was wearing thin even here, among people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. Christopher's phone, finally charged, buzzed with another message from Lana. This one was different from her usual shopping requests. "We need to talk. I'm starting to think this whole situation is more serious than you told me. My friends are asking questions I can't answer." Christopher closed his eyes, realizing that his carefully constructed lies were beginning to unravel in multiple directions. Lana was getting suspicious. His family was losing patience. His attorney had basically told him he had no legal recourse. And Grace was moving forward without him as if he'd never existed at all. For the first time since this nightmare began, Christopher wondered if there was any way back from the choices he'd made. The answer, floating just beyond his conscious acknowledgement, was becoming clearer every day. There wasn't. Lana Brooks sat across from Christopher at a corner table in a diner on the Upper East Side, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming impatiently against the chipped formica. The stark fluorescent lighting was unforgiving, highlighting the stress lines that had appeared around her eyes over the past few weeks. This wasn't the romantic restaurant where their affair had begun. Christopher could no longer afford those places. "I've been patient, Christopher," Lana said, her voice carefully controlled. "But I need answers. Real answers." Christopher stirred his coffee, avoiding her gaze. The past month had aged him visibly. His once pristine appearance had given way to wrinkled shirts and shoes that needed polishing. "I told you the separation is just temporary. Grace is being emotional about the whole thing." "Emotional?" Lana's laugh was sharp. "Christopher, I Googled her. Grace Walters owns a construction company worth millions. She's not some fragile housewife having a breakdown. She's a businesswoman who just cut you off completely." The words stung because they were true. Christopher had spent so many months portraying Grace as clingy and dependent that he'd almost convinced himself it was real. Facing the truth of his wife's capabilities was more painful than he'd expected. "It's complicated, Lana." "No, it's not." Lana leaned forward, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I talked to my friend Jessica, the one who works at Morrison & Associates. They're one of your wife's clients, right? She told me some very interesting things." Christopher's stomach dropped. Morrison & Associates was one of their biggest accounts, a law firm that had contracted Walters Construction for their office renovation. "What kind of things?" "Like how everyone there is relieved that Grace is handling the project alone now. Like how you made several of the female staff members uncomfortable with inappropriate comments and wandering hands." Lana's eyes were cold now, calculating. "Tell me, Christopher, were you cheating on your wife before me, or am I just the latest in a long line of poor judgment calls?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Christopher opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Lana was smarter than he'd given her credit for, and his usual charm wasn't working on her anymore. "I never cheated on Grace before you," he said finally, which was technically true. He'd never slept with anyone else during his marriage, though there had been plenty of flirtation, plenty of boundary-crossing behavior that Grace had either missed or chosen to ignore. "But you were building up to it, weren't you? Testing the waters, seeing how far you could push things." Lana sat back, studying him with new eyes. "My God, Christopher, I thought I was special. I thought we had something real. But I'm just another conquest, aren't I?" "That's not true. Lana, what we have is over." Lana stood abruptly, gathering her designer purse. "I'm not interested in being with a man who abandons his pregnant wife and then lies about everything else. Find somewhere else to sleep tonight, Christopher, and lose my number." She walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving Christopher alone with a cold cup of coffee and the crushing weight of his isolation. Through the window, he watched her hail a taxi with the confident ease of someone who had never doubted her own worth, something he'd found attractive when it was directed at him, but terrifying now that it was turned against him. His phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Monica wants you out by Friday. I'm sorry, man, but you need to figure something else out." Christopher stared at the message, trying to process the reality of his situation. No money, no home, no girlfriend, no family support. In the span of a month, he'd gone from successful businessman to a middle-aged man with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Grace was experiencing the opposite transformation. She stood in the conference room of Walters Construction, addressing her team with a confidence that had been growing stronger each day. The business was thriving without Christopher's erratic leadership and questionable client relations. "The Morrison project is ahead of schedule and under budget," she announced to the small group of contractors and project managers. "The Riverside apartment complex renovation has been approved for a second phase, and we've received 3 new project inquiries this week alone." Tom Richardson, her lead foreman, raised his hand. "Grace, I have to say, the whole crew is working better these days. There's less tension on the job sites." Grace nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying directly. Christopher's presence had often created problems with both workers and clients, though she'd been too close to the situation to see it clearly at the time. "I appreciate everyone's professionalism during this transition period," Grace said diplomatically. "Moving forward, all client relations will go through me directly. I want to make sure we're maintaining the highest standards of service and conduct." After the meeting, Grace returned to her office to find Howard Bennett waiting with a stack of papers and a grim expression. "Grace, we need to talk about Christopher's response to the separation papers. He's fighting it. He's trying to. His attorney filed a motion claiming he's entitled to half the business assets as a common law partner. They're also requesting joint custody and alleging that you've engaged in financial warfare by freezing the accounts. Grace felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was controlled now, focused. What does that mean for us? It means we go to court. But Grace, I have to be honest. Christopher's case is extremely weak. The documentation clearly shows that you're the sole owner of all business assets. His attorney is essentially hoping the judge will feel sorry for him. And the custody issue? Howard's expression softened. That's more complicated. Regardless of his other failings, Christopher is Lily's father. He'll likely get some form of visitation rights, though. Given the circumstances of his abandonment, it probably won't be the joint custody he's requesting. Grace looked out her office window at the busy Manhattan street below. People hurried past, living their normal lives, unaware of the quiet war being waged in conference rooms and legal offices throughout the city. Howard, there's something else. I've been hearing things about Christopher's behavior with female clients and employees. Nothing criminal, but inappropriate comments, unwanted touching. I'm wondering if there might be more we don't know about. Howard made a note on his legal pad. That could be relevant, especially if there's a pattern of behavior. Are any of these women willing to provide statements? I'm still gathering information, but yes, I think some of them would be willing to speak up if it meant protecting other women from similar treatment. As Grace and Howard discussed strategy, Christopher was walking the streets of Manhattan, carrying a duffel bag with his few remaining possessions and trying to figure out where he could afford to spend the night. The luxury hotels where he'd once entertained clients were far beyond his reach now. Even the modest chain hotels seemed expensive when viewed through the lens of his $300 bank balance. He found himself standing outside the construction site of one of Grace's current projects, watching workers who had once reported to him going about their business without a second thought for his absence. It was as if he'd never existed at all, a realization that was somehow more devastating than all the financial losses combined. His phone rang. For a moment, his heart leaped, thinking it might be Grace calling to end this nightmare. Instead, he saw his mother's number. Christopher, where are you staying? Kevin called and said you're not at his place anymore. I'm figuring it out, Mom. Christopher Robert Walters, you are not homeless. Come stay with your father and me until you sort this out. The offer was tempting, but Christopher knew what it would mean. Returning to his childhood bedroom at 46, facing his parents' disappointment every day, admitting that his carefully constructed adult life had been built on foundations of sand. I'll be fine, Mom. I just need a few days to get organized. Christopher, Dorothy's voice was soft, sad. Your father and I love you, but we can't pretend that what you did was acceptable. Grace is raising our granddaughter alone because of choices you made. If you're not willing to face that honestly, I don't know how we can help you. As his mother hung up, Christopher realized that he'd burned more bridges than he'd counted. The life he'd thought was constraining him had actually been supporting him in ways he'd never understood. Now standing alone on a busy street with nowhere to go, he was beginning to understand the true cost of his freedom. The Manhattan Family Court building on Center Street was a maze of marble corridors and fluorescent-lit waiting rooms that smelled of anxiety and broken dreams. Grace sat on a hard wooden bench outside courtroom 3C, Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier, seemingly oblivious to the legal proceedings that would determine the framework of her future. Howard Bennett reviewed his notes one final time, his weathered briefcase open beside him. Remember, Grace, stay calm regardless of what Christopher or his attorney claim. We have the facts, the documentation, and the law on our side. Across the hallway, Christopher sat with David Blackstone, whose cheap suit and desperate demeanor made an unfortunate contrast to Howard's quiet competence. Christopher had spent the previous night in a YMCA shelter, a humiliation that showed in the dark circles under his eyes, and the wrinkled shirt he'd tried unsuccessfully to iron in the facility's laundry room. Just stick to the story, Blackstone whispered urgently. You were under enormous stress about becoming a father. You made one mistake, but you're committed to your family now. Don't mention the other woman unless directly asked. The advice felt hollow to Christopher, who was beginning to understand that his problems ran much deeper than one night of poor judgment. The past month had stripped away the comfortable illusions he'd built around his life, revealing a pattern of selfishness and irresponsibility that even he couldn't deny anymore. All parties in Walters versus Walters, please enter the courtroom, announced the bailiff, a stern woman who'd clearly seen every variety of human drama that family court could offer. Judge Maria Santos took her seat at the bench with the efficient movements of someone who'd presided over hundreds of similar cases. At 62, she had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and the sharp eyes of someone who could spot deception from across a crowded courtroom. This is a hearing regarding temporary custody and financial arrangements pending formal divorce proceedings, Judge Santos began, consulting the file before her. Mr. Bennett, you represent Mrs. Walters? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Blackstone, you represent Mr. Walters? That's correct, Your Honor. Judge Santos looked directly at Christopher. Mr. Walters, I've reviewed the circumstances surrounding this case. You abandoned your wife while she was in labor to spend the evening with another woman. Is that accurate? Christopher's face flushed red. Your Honor, I was under tremendous stress about becoming a father. I made a poor decision, but that's a yes or no question, Mr. Walters. Did you abandon your wife while she was in labor? Yes, Your Honor, but thank you. Judge Santos turned her attention to the papers before her. Mrs. Walters, you've requested full temporary custody of the minor child and exclusive access to marital assets. On what grounds? Howard stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Walters is the sole legal owner of all assets in question. The business, the home, and all financial accounts are registered in her name alone. Mr. Walters has no legal claim to these assets. Blackstone jumped up. Your Honor, my client contributed to building that business through his labor and expertise. He deserves compensation for his efforts regardless of whose name appears on the paperwork. Judge Santos studied the documentation. Mr. Blackstone, your client was employed by the business as a general manager. The payroll records show he received a substantial salary for his work. Are you arguing that employees should receive ownership stakes in companies simply by virtue of their employment? Your Honor, this was a marital partnership in which your client chose to prioritize another relationship over his pregnant wife. Judge Santos's voice carried a steel edge that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. Mr. Walters, stand up. Christopher rose on unsteady legs, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Mr. Walters, I want you to explain to me why you believe you deserve joint custody of a child you abandoned before she was even born. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Christopher opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Your Honor, I love my daughter. I want to be part of her life. I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean I should be punished forever. A mistake, Judge Santos repeated. Mr. Walters, I've been presiding over family court for 15 years. I've seen men who missed their children's births because they were deployed overseas, because they were in car accidents, because they were working 3 jobs to support their families. Those are circumstances beyond their control. She leaned forward. You missed your daughter's birth because you chose to have dinner with your girlfriend. That's not a mistake. That's a decision that reveals your priorities. Christopher felt the walls of the courtroom closing in around him. In the gallery behind him, he could hear someone shifting uncomfortably. Probably his brother Kevin, who'd come despite his wife's objections. Howard stood again. Your Honor, there's additional information the court should consider. We have testimony from several women who've had professional interactions with Mr. Walters over the past 2 years. They describe a pattern of inappropriate behavior, unwanted comments, inappropriate touching, and general unprofessional conduct. Objection! Blackstone shouted. Those allegations are unsubstantiated and irrelevant to custody proceedings. Your Honor, Howard continued calmly, this information is directly relevant to Mr. Walters' character and judgment, particularly as it relates to his interactions with women and his ability to provide a safe environment for a female child. Judge Santos considered this. I'll allow the testimony. Mr. Bennett, call your witness. The next hour was a nightmare of Christopher's own making. 3 women took the stand, a client, a former employee, and a supplier, each describing encounters with Christopher that ranged from uncomfortable to borderline predatory. The picture that emerged was of a man who viewed his position of power as licensed to behave however he pleased, with no consideration for the impact on others. Jennifer Morrison, the lawyer whose firm had contracted with Walters Construction, spoke last. Mr. Walters made several comments about my appearance that were highly inappropriate for a business meeting. When I asked him to focus on the construction timeline, he laughed and said I was too uptight and needed to learn to enjoy male attention. She paused, looking directly at Christopher. I told my colleagues that if Grace Walters hadn't been overseeing the project, we would have terminated the contract immediately. Christopher wanted to disappear into the floor. Each testimony built on the last, creating an undeniable portrait of someone who'd abused his position and treated women as objects for his entertainment. Worse, he was beginning to remember incidents he'd dismissed or forgotten, moments when he'd justified his behavior as harmless flirtation. Judge Santos called a brief recess. In the hallway, Christopher found himself face to face with Grace for the first time since their confrontation at the house. She was holding Lily, who had woken up and was looking around with the curious eyes of a healthy 2-month-old. "Grace," Christopher said desperately, "this is getting out of hand. These women are exaggerating." "Are they?" Grace's voice was quiet but firm. "Christopher, I listened to that testimony, and for the first time, I understood why so many of our female clients specifically requested to work with me instead of you. I thought it was because I was more detail-oriented. I never realized it was because you made them uncomfortable." Christopher looked down at his daughter, seeing Grace's determined chin in miniature. Can I hold her?" Grace studied his face for a long moment, then carefully transferred Lily to his arms. The baby was warm and solid, smelling of powder and innocence. For a moment, Christopher felt a rush of genuine love and protectiveness that had nothing to do with his own needs or desires. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes, she is." Grace's voice was soft. "Christopher, I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishment or revenge. This is about protection. I need to know that Lily will grow up understanding that she has value beyond what she can provide to men. I need to know that she'll never accept the kind of treatment I accepted for too long." The words hit Christopher like a physical blow. Looking down at his daughter's perfect face, he suddenly understood what Grace was fighting for. It wasn't about money or property or even his behavior toward other women. It was about raising a daughter who would never doubt her own worth. "I want to be better," he said. And for the first time in months, he meant it completely. "I hope you can be," Grace replied. "But you'll have to prove that to someone else. Lily and I are moving forward without you." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Santos delivered her ruling with the crisp efficiency of someone who'd heard enough. Full temporary custody is awarded to Mrs. Walters. Mr. Walters will be granted supervised visitation rights, 2 hours per week, pending completion of a parenting course, and anger management counseling. All marital assets remain under Mrs. Walters' control as they are legally hers. Mr. Walters' request for spousal support is denied. She looked directly at Christopher. "Mr. Walters, I strongly suggest you use this time to reflect on the choices that brought you to this courtroom. Court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, Christopher understood that his old life was officially over. The question now was whether he had the strength to build something better from the ruins he'd created. 9 months after the court hearing, Grace stood in the nursery doorway watching Lily play with soft blocks on a colorful mat. At 15 months old, her daughter was curious about everything, reaching for toys with determined little hands and babbling in a language only she understood. The room was filled with afternoon sunlight, and for the first time in years, Grace felt genuinely peaceful. Her phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. "Coffee date still on for 2 p.m.? Can't wait to hear about the Henderson project." Grace smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Her friendship with Meredith had deepened over the past year, strengthened by the crisis that had revealed who truly cared about her well-being. The business had shown steady improvement, 2 solid contracts completed successfully, and a growing reputation for professionalism that was attracting more inquiries. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Grace wasn't expecting anyone, but when she looked through the peephole, she saw Christopher standing on her front step. He looked different, thinner, wearing clothes that had seen better days, but there was something in his posture that seemed less desperate than the last time she'd seen him. Grace opened the door cautiously, keeping it partially closed. "Christopher, you're supposed to arrange visits through the court mediator." "I know, I'm not here for a visit." Christopher's voice was quieter than she remembered, less demanding. "I wanted to give you this." He held out a manila envelope, his hands steady but nervous. Grace noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring anymore, a small detail that somehow felt significant. "What is it?" "Divorce papers. I signed them." Christopher looked down at his feet, then back at her face. "I'm not fighting the custody arrangement anymore either. You were right. Lily deserves better than what I can give her right now." Grace studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Instead, she saw something she'd never seen before in Christopher: genuine humility. "What changed your mind?" Christopher was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I've been going to counseling. Court-mandated, but it's helping. Dr. Martinez has been making me look at patterns in my behavior that I never wanted to see before. And I realized that everything you said was true. I am selfish. I do put my own needs first, even when it hurts people I claim to love." Christopher's voice cracked slightly. "I spent our entire marriage making you responsible for my happiness, and when that felt like too much pressure, I looked for someone else to fill the void instead of dealing with my own problems." Grace felt a familiar ache in her chest. Not love, exactly, but the ghost of what love had been before it was wounded too many times. "Christopher, I'm not asking for forgiveness," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for another chance. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did to you, what I did to us, it was unforgivable. And Lily deserves to grow up with a mother who knows her own worth." The conversation was interrupted by Lily's delighted squeal from the living room. Christopher's eyes brightened involuntarily at the sound. "How is she?" "She's wonderful. She's crawling now, getting into everything. She loves music and books, and she has this laugh that—" Grace trailed off, realizing she didn't need to share these details with him. "I'm glad she's happy." Christopher shifted the envelope in his hands. "Grace, there's something else. I've been attending meetings, AA meetings. Not because I'm an alcoholic, but because Dr. Martinez said I needed to understand addiction and compulsive behavior. There's a guy there, Marcus, who lost his family because of his gambling addiction." Grace waited, unsure where this was leading. "He told me something that stuck with me. He said the hardest part wasn't admitting he had a problem. It was admitting that his problem had consequences for other people, that his choices didn't just hurt him." Christopher looked directly at her for the first time since arriving. "I hurt you, Grace. I hurt our daughter. And I can't undo that by feeling sorry for myself or making excuses." The admission hung in the air between them. Grace had waited 3 years to hear Christopher take real responsibility for his actions without deflecting or making himself the victim. Now that it was happening, she felt more sad than vindicated. "What are you doing now? For work, I mean." Christopher's smile was rueful. "I'm working construction. Day labor mostly. Ironic, right? I'm finally doing the actual building instead of just taking credit for other people's work. That must be difficult." "It is. But it's honest work. And I'm learning things I should have learned years ago. Like how to show up every day whether I feel like it or not. How to take direction from people who know more than I do." He paused. "How to earn respect instead of demanding it." Grace found herself studying this version of Christopher, humbled, reflective, seemingly genuine in his self-awareness. It was the man she'd hoped he could become during all those years of making excuses for his behavior. "The supervised visits," Christopher began hesitantly. "You haven't been coming to them." "I know. I wanted to get my head straight first. I didn't want Lily's first real memories of her father to be of someone who was angry and bitter and blaming everyone else for his problems." Christopher looked toward the house where Lily's happy babbling could still be heard. "Do you think, when I'm ready, do you think she might be willing to know me?" The question was asked with such genuine uncertainty that Grace felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. That would take much longer if it came at all, but a recognition that Christopher was finally asking the right questions. "I think," Grace said carefully, "that if you continue working on yourself, if you prove that you can be consistent and stable, then maybe someday Lily can decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants with you." Christopher nodded, blinking back tears. "That's more than I deserve." "Yes, it is." The honesty of her response seemed to hit him, but he didn't argue or get defensive. Instead, he just nodded again. "I should go. But Grace, thank you for protecting her, for being the parent she deserves when I couldn't be." After Christopher left, Grace sat in her living room holding the divorce papers and watching Lily practice pulling herself up on the coffee table. Her daughter was determined, focused, completely absorbed in the challenge of standing upright. When she finally managed it, she looked around with pride and clapped her little hands together in celebration. Grace found herself smiling. Lily was going to be just fine. Strong, independent, confident in her own abilities. She would grow up knowing that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that relationships were built on respect and consistency, not grand gestures and empty promises. The phone rang, and Grace saw Howard Bennett's number. "Grace, I wanted to let you know that Christopher's attorney filed the signed divorce papers this afternoon. If you're still comfortable with the terms we discussed, this can all be finalized within the month." "I'm comfortable with them, Howard. Thank you for everything." "It's been my pleasure, Grace. I have to say, you've handled this entire situation with remarkable grace and strength. Your father would be very proud." After hanging up, Grace looked around her home, truly her home now, legally and emotionally. The family photos on the mantelpiece included pictures of her parents, her and Meredith, even Christopher's parents with Lily. But the pictures of her and Christopher as a couple had been quietly removed, replaced with images of her new life. Lily's first smile, the groundbreaking ceremony for her latest construction project, moments of genuine happiness. As evening approached, Grace prepared Lily's dinner while her daughter played contentedly in her high chair. This was her life now, quiet, stable, focused on building something real, rather than maintaining something broken. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was infinitely better than the one she'd been settling for. 1 year after that cold November night in the hospital, Grace stood in the marble lobby of the Riverside Heights development project, her latest and most ambitious construction undertaking. At 2 years old, Lily toddled around the spacious area, her tiny hands exploring the smooth surfaces while her mother conducted the final walkthrough with the building's future residents. "Mrs. Walters, the attention to detail is extraordinary," said Elena Martinez, a young professional who would be moving into one of the luxury apartments. "The safety features, the soundproofing, the environmental considerations. It's clear this building was designed by someone who truly understands what families need." Grace smiled, watching Lily discover her own reflection in the polished marble walls. "Thank you. Creating spaces where people can build healthy lives has always been my priority." The project had garnered attention in the local industry press. Grace's reputation as a contractor, who delivered solid work on time and within budget, was growing steadily. More importantly, her insistence on safe, respectful work environments had begun attracting quality craftspeople and suppliers who appreciated working with her professional approach. As the clients left, Grace gathered Lily's toys and prepared to head home. The autumn afternoon was crisp and bright, the kind of weather that made her grateful for the simple pleasure of walking through her neighborhood with her daughter. They were approaching the small coffee shop near Grace's house when she saw a familiar figure through the window. Lana Brooks sat alone at a corner table, stirring a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold hours ago. She looked tired, older somehow, despite the expensive clothes and perfect makeup that had once been her armor. Grace hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that surprised her. She secured Lily in her stroller and entered the coffee shop. Lana, the younger woman, looked up, startled. For a moment, neither spoke. Lana's eyes moved to Lily, taking in the toddler's bright eyes and confident demeanor. "Grace, I didn't expect to see you here. I live nearby." Grace pulled out the chair across from Lana, settling Lily's stroller beside the table. "How are you?" Lana's laugh was bitter. "That's a complicated question." Grace studied her carefully. Lana was still beautiful, but there was something different about her, a wariness that hadn't been there before, as if she'd learned to expect disappointment rather than adulation. "I heard about what happened with Christopher," Lana said quietly. "The divorce, the custody hearing. I'm sorry. Are you?" The directness of the question caught Lana off guard. She looked down at her coffee cup, then back at Grace. "Yes, actually. I am sorry. Not about the divorce, you're better off without him. But I'm sorry about how it all happened, about my part in it." Grace waited, sensing there was more Lana wanted to say. "I was so stupid," Lana continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was getting something special. A successful man, financial security, a life that would make all my friends jealous." She gestured vaguely toward the window. "Do you know what I got instead? Tell me." "A reputation as the woman who breaks up marriages. Do you know how that follows you? How it changes the way people look at you?" Lana's eyes filled with tears. "I lost my job. My boss said I was a liability to the company's family-friendly image. My friends stopped inviting me to parties because their husbands were either afraid of me or interested in me for all the wrong reasons." Grace felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been sympathy. "What are you doing now?" "Working retail. Saks Fifth Avenue in cosmetics. Ironic, right? The place where I used to shop with Christopher's money. Now I'm working there for minimum wage plus commission." Lana wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her mascara. "The other girls there are mostly college students. They don't know about what I did. To them, I'm just some older woman who obviously made some bad choices." Lily made a happy gurgling sound, reaching for the sugar packets on the table. Grace automatically redirected her daughter's attention to a soft toy, the movement so natural and practiced that it spoke of months of devoted motherhood. "She's beautiful," Lana said, watching the interaction. "She looks like you. Thank you. Grace, I need you to know something. I know this doesn't change anything, but Christopher lied to me about everything. He told me you two were separated, that the marriage was over, that you were just staying together for convenience until after the baby was born. Lana's voice grew stronger, more urgent. I'm not making excuses for myself. I should have asked more questions, should have verified his story. But I want you to know that I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth. Grace considered this information. It didn't excuse Lana's behavior, but it did confirm something she'd suspected, that Christopher's capacity for deception had extended far beyond their marriage. Why are you telling me this? Because I see mothers with their children every day at work. Young women planning their weddings, buying makeup for special occasions, talking about their hopes for the future. Lana looked directly at Grace. And I realized that I could have destroyed all of that for you. I could have been the reason that beautiful little girl grew up without her parents together. That keeps me awake at night. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Grace felt the last of her anger toward Lana dissolving, replaced by something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Lana, I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. Lana looked up, sensing the change in Grace's tone. You want to know if people can change? If you can become someone worth respecting? Grace's voice was calm but steel-edged. Let me tell you what you need to understand first. Grace leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Lana's face. You didn't just have an affair with my husband. You participated in destroying a family. While I was carrying his child, working to build our future, you were helping him lie to himself that he deserved better than the life we'd built together. Lana opened her mouth to speak, but Grace held up a hand. You say Christopher told you we were separated, that our marriage was over. But Lana, even if that had been true, which it wasn't, did you ever think about the pregnant woman whose husband you were entertaining? Did you ever wonder what kind of man abandons his wife when she's most vulnerable? Lana's face flushed red. I trusted what he told me. No, you didn't trust anything. You wanted what he could give you, the expensive dinners, the shopping trips, the feeling of being special. You knew he was married. You knew I was pregnant. But you told yourself whatever story made it easier to take what you wanted. Grace's voice remained steady, but every word landed like a blow. The truth is, Lana, you didn't care about me or my baby because we weren't real to you. We were just obstacles to what you wanted. And when a woman, any woman, helps a man abandon his pregnant wife, she's showing exactly what she values. Her own pleasure over another woman's pain. Tears were streaming down Lana's face now. But Grace wasn't finished. You want to know if you can change? Here's what you need to accept. You're not the victim in this story. You're not even the main character. You were a selfish person who made selfish choices, and now you're living with the consequences. The fact that those consequences are hard doesn't make you sympathetic. It makes them appropriate. Grace stood, gathering Lily's things with deliberate movements. If you want to become someone worth respecting, stop looking for forgiveness from the people you hurt. Stop expecting sympathy for the consequences of your own actions. And most importantly, stop making choices that prioritize your comfort over other people's families. She looked down at Lana one last time. Every woman who gets involved with a married man tells herself she's special, that her situation is different. You weren't special, Lana. You were just another woman who was willing to help a man betray his wife. Remember that the next time you're tempted to take something that doesn't belong to you. Grace adjusted Lily's stroller and turned toward the door. And if you truly want to change, start by never, ever being the reason another woman cries alone in a hospital bed. As Grace walked home through the golden afternoon light, Lily chattering happily in her stroller, she reflected on the unexpected encounter. Lana's fall from grace had been swift and complete, her reputation tarnished, her prospects diminished, her future dependent on hard work rather than the charm and beauty that had once opened doors for her. It was, Grace realized, exactly the kind of consequence that fit the crime. Not legal punishment or dramatic public shaming, but the quiet, persistent difficulty of rebuilding a life after making choices that revealed poor character and judgment. That evening, Grace sat in her living room while Lily played with wooden blocks, building towers and knocking them down with delighted laughter. The house was warm and peaceful, filled with the comfortable sounds of a life well lived. Her phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Lily's birthday is next month. I'd like to send a gift if that's okay. Nothing big, just something age-appropriate that shows I'm thinking of her. Grace considered the message. Christopher had been consistent in his efforts to change, attending therapy, working steadily, staying away unless invited. He was becoming the person he should have been all along. Too late for their marriage, but perhaps not too late for his relationship with his daughter. She typed back, "That would be fine. Thank you for asking first." As Lily prepared for her nightly bath, Grace thought about the strange journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, she had been a woman who made excuses for her husband's behavior, who accepted crumbs of affection, who had convinced herself that love meant enduring rather than expecting better. Now she was a successful businesswoman, a confident mother, and most importantly, a person who knew her own worth. Lily would grow up watching a mother who commanded respect rather than begged for it, who built rather than enabled, who chose strength over convenience. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of her real life. Christopher and Lana had given her an unexpected gift, the chance to discover who she was when she stopped defining herself by other people's needs and limitations. As she tucked Lily into her crib that night, Grace whispered the same promise she'd made in the hospital 18 months ago. "You will always know you're worth fighting for, baby girl. Always." Outside, the November wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last leaves of autumn and making room for whatever would grow in the spring. 2 years later, Grace stood in the kitchen of her home, preparing Lily's breakfast while her 3-year-old daughter practiced counting the blueberries in her bowl. The morning routine was peaceful, predictable, and entirely their own. "Mommy, 5 blueberries," Lily announced proudly, holding up her small fingers. "That's right, sweetheart. Good counting." Grace's phone buzzed with a work text from her project manager about the downtown office renovation that was finishing on schedule. Walter's construction had grown steadily over the past 2 years, earning a solid reputation for reliability and professionalism. Grace had hired 2 additional project managers and was considering expanding to take on larger commercial projects. The business growth was steady, sustainable, and built on reputation rather than promises. The doorbell rang. Through the window, Grace could see Christopher standing on the porch, holding a small, wrapped package. It was Lily's birthday, her 3rd, and he'd asked permission to deliver a gift in person rather than through the court mediator. Grace had agreed, but with clear boundaries about time and expectations. "Daddy's here," Grace told Lily matter-of-factly. Lily looked up with mild interest but continued eating her breakfast. Christopher was a familiar presence in her life now, someone who visited occasionally, who sent cards and age-appropriate gifts, but who wasn't central to her daily world. It was exactly the relationship Grace had hoped for, present enough that Lily wouldn't grow up with questions about her father's absence, but limited enough to prevent disappointment when his attention inevitably wavered. Grace opened the door. Christopher looked better than he had in years, healthier, more grounded, wearing work clothes that were clean but showed honest wear. He'd been promoted to crew chief at his construction job and was living in a modest apartment in Brooklyn. The transformation wasn't dramatic or inspiring. It was simply the slow, unremarkable process of a man learning to be responsible. "Happy birthday, Lily," Christopher said, offering the wrapped package. Lily accepted the gift politely, but without excitement. She unwrapped it to reveal a simple wooden puzzle of farm animals. Age-appropriate, thoughtfully chosen, nothing excessive. "Thank you," Lily said, then returned to her breakfast. Christopher's face showed a flicker of something. Not quite disappointment, but recognition that he was essentially a stranger to his own daughter. Grace felt no urge to smooth over the awkwardness or encourage a warmer response. This was the natural consequence of his choices, and Lily's indifference was honest. "She's doing well," Christopher observed, watching Lily concentrate on her blueberries. "Yes, she is. Grace, I wanted to tell you, I'm seeing someone. Nothing serious, just, I wanted you to know before Lily might hear about it." Grace felt no jealousy, no curiosity about the woman's identity or appearance. "As long as it doesn't affect your visits with Lily, your personal life is your business." Christopher nodded, understanding the boundaries. "Of course, I just thought transparency was important." "It is." After Christopher left, Grace cleaned up Lily's breakfast dishes while her daughter played with the new puzzle on the living room floor. The house was quiet except for Lily's occasional comments to herself as she worked. Grace's phone rang. Meredith's name appeared on the screen. "Happy birthday to my favorite niece." Meredith's voice was bright with affection. "Are you two ready for the zoo adventure?" Grace smiled. They'd planned a simple birthday celebration, the zoo, ice cream, and dinner with Meredith and Grace's mother. No party, no fanfare, just a day focused on what Lily actually enjoyed. "We're ready." "She's very excited about seeing the penguins." Good. And Grace, how are you doing? Really? Grace considered the question. How was she doing? She was financially secure but not wealthy, professionally successful but not famous, personally content but not in love. It was a life built on steady foundations rather than grand gestures, on respect rather than passion, on reality rather than dreams. I'm doing well, Mir. Really well. And she was. Grace had learned the difference between settling and choosing, between being alone and being lonely, between being loved and being valued. Lily was growing up confident and secure, watching a mother who commanded respect and built things that lasted. Sometimes Grace wondered about the woman she might have been if Christopher had never betrayed her, if she'd continued making excuses for his behavior, continued accepting less than she deserved, continued believing that love required sacrifice rather than reciprocity. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone who'd been sleepwalking through her own life. The betrayal that had once seemed like the worst thing that could happen had turned out to be exactly what she'd needed to wake up. As Grace helped Lily put on her coat for their zoo adventure, she thought about the lesson she was teaching her daughter every day, not through words, but through example. Lily was learning that women could build businesses, make decisions, and thrive independently. She was learning that love was supposed to feel safe, not desperate. She was learning that her worth wasn't determined by how well she pleased other people. These weren't lessons Grace could have taught while married to Christopher, while making excuses for his behavior, while modeling acceptance of disrespect. Sometimes the greatest gift you could give your child was showing them what life looked like when you refused to settle for less than you deserved. Ready, Mommy? Lily asked, clutching her small backpack with the serious determination of a 3-year-old on an important mission. Ready, Grace replied, taking her daughter's hand. They walked out into the crisp autumn morning, two people building a life based on honesty, respect, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly where they stood. It wasn't the life Grace had planned, but it was infinitely better than the one she'd been settling for. Behind them, the house stood solid and secure, a home built on truth rather than compromise, sheltering a family of two who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength came from knowing when to let go. The sun was shining. Lily was chattering about penguins, and Grace Walters had never been more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Final message. Sometimes life's cruelest betrayals become its greatest gifts. Grace's story reminds us that our worth isn't determined by how well we please others, but by how fiercely we protect our own dignity. When someone shows you who they really are through their actions, believe them the first time. Love isn't supposed to require you to shrink, to excuse, or to accept disrespect. True strength isn't staying in situations that diminish you. It's having the courage to build something better, even when it means standing alone. Grace didn't win because she destroyed Christopher or because she became wealthy and famous. She won because she refused to teach her daughter that women should accept less than they deserve. She won because she chose truth over comfort, respect over familiarity, and her own worth over someone else's convenience. In a world that often tells women to forgive, understand, and make excuses for bad behavior, Grace's story is a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for those who depend on you, is to walk away and never look back. When someone you love repeatedly chooses their own comfort over your pain, at what point does staying become a betrayal of yourself? The end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.